Our next speaker is Cathal O'Reilly from Johnson & Johnson. And Cathal has been with Johnson & Johnson since 2007. His first 4 years were on heading up the business transformation programme for Dupuy, Ireland, and helping the team to become recognised as a global leader in operational excellence. Since then, he's had global roles leading a number of programmes that help transform systems, build high-performance cultures, and deliver sustainable results across global networks. He has a primary degree in industrial engineering from Galway and a master's degree in lean operations from Cardiff University. Will you put your hands together, please, for Cathal?
Good afternoon. It's nice to see all the guest speakers before me, with the exception of maybe Eddie and Nuala. We all share the same barber, so I'm keeping the trend going. What I'm here to talk to you today about is really, I suppose, yeah, as Joe was mentioning, I also work for Johnson & Johnson. And I guess in the last 2 years, we've begun to look at our business differently. We've been very much, let's say, internally focused, and that's, let's say, caught us on the hop on a few occasions. So we've begun to kind of shift and look more so to the outside and predict what's happening in the global environment and try to bring those insights internally and get ahead of the curve. So what I really want to share with you today is trying to keep it simple. There's a lot to consider and try to boil it down to maybe the few essentials. Where's the biggest areas we can make the difference. So I suppose to begin, I'm just going to kind of share a quick story and to start off, and it was about 2 years ago, I attended a leadership summit out in California with other leaders from across our supply chain. And over the course of the few days, the question was always being asked, if you look at the challenges that we're faced with today in our business, what do we need to do differently as leaders? How can we drive better levels of engagement and productivity, motivation? And obviously, there's a whole load of solutions that are being put out to try and answer that question. And everybody's right, but it's what do we need to focus on most. So one of the things I did to intervene, because I like to think or keep things as simple as possible, is I brought this up with me as well. It's a nice simple prop because nearly every meeting room or conference has one, and it's free, so why not use it? So I stood up and I basically held a bottle very similar to this in front of everybody in the room and asked a very simple question. What is it you see I'm holding in my hand? Okay. What do you think most people said? Great. A bottle of water. Got one response, the same response from everybody. So I asked the question slightly differently the second time. Just phrased it slightly differently is, besides a bottle of water, what else could I be holding in my hand? And in the next 60 seconds, list down as many different uses or applications you can come up with. That's all. So after 60 seconds had passed, just went around the room, got everybody to call out how many different applications or uses they had come up with. On average, per person, how many do you think we got? Throw a few random numbers. 10, 50, 2. Yeah. In around 6. Actually pretty impressive, I thought, because that's actually one different use or idea being generated every 10 seconds. I tried this in the plane coming home as well, and I gave myself 20 minutes, and I came up with 50, and this is 6 in 1 minute, so pretty impressive. However, I think let's say the aha moment in the room went off was when we went around and started with the first person to call out what they had come up with, and got every other individual then after that to add to the list anything that had not been previously called out. And what we ended up was 96 different applications or uses in the same time frame, in the same minute. Okay, coming from 29 different leaders. Okay, and obviously as you're there thinking, what could I use it for? There are some pictures to prompt you. Okay, but what were the kind of key learning points for people in the room? Why were we doing this exercise? First and foremost, I suppose we operate in a very complex environment today, and kind of recognizing that probably one of the greatest resources that we have failed to exploit is actually right in front of us. It's our people and ourselves. What sits between our 2 ears, wisdom and talent. And it's something that we actually fail to tap into a lot. We look at maybe the sexy solutions. We look outside. Most of the answers are actually inside us. But we fail to kind of give ourselves time to recognize it. We look at life differently. We take things as they are, not what they could be. From a collaboration point of view, we saw the power of actually listening to one another and actually getting everybody's insights on paper. You know, like 96 rich ideas in 1 minute, and that's only 1 minute of our time. If we looked at problems differently and got a number of people together, you know, look at all the fresh ideas that could be generated if you just got everybody looking at the problem differently and using their own experiences and talent. Third learning point as well is that we often refine people to a very conducive set of tasks or duties within our organizations, following procedures, delivering on KPIs. You know, as leaders, we have to recognize that people have much more to contribute. The motivational theorists of the 1960s, you had Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, all saying the same thing. This is nothing new, actually, that the greatest form of intrinsic motivation is self-actualization, self-fulfillment, okay, self-achievement. And there's no greater form of actually intrinsic motivation to recognize that you can actually contribute to something great and have the ability to do so. So when we often restrict people to a confined set of procedures or responsibilities, there's a whole host of opportunity that we're missing out on. So it was kind of an aha moment within the room that day, and it kind of changed the way we're going to look at business going forward, and changed the way, I suppose, as leaders, we looked at our people and looked at ourselves. And I suppose recognizing that maybe not all of us can be inventors, but every single one of us can be an innovator. And it's just about giving people the opportunity to think differently and look at problems differently. So the two curves that I have here, because that's actually the theme of this presentation, is getting ahead of the curve. It's a very simple concept that I came across a few years ago, and I love the idea because it can paint a very powerful picture. The blue curve here represents typically the rate of change in an organization. Most organizations will learn, will grow and improve over time. But there comes a point in time for many organizations too where the rate of change externally actually surpasses the rate of internal change. And one example in Johnson & Johnson, going back maybe to the mid-noughties, 2005, 2006, Cordis is a company that many of you might be familiar with. That was one of the kingpins within the medical devices sector. They provided over 50% of the revenue stream to our medical devices division. Today, they're actually less than 5%, okay? Just didn't keep ahead of the curve. In the mobile phone space, I'm sure most people in this room today probably had a Nokia phone back in 2009. Nokia commanded 40% of the mobile phone market in 2009. Samsung at the same time were only 5%. Today, that's reversed. Nokia are less than 5%, and Samsung have actually surpassed 40%. So you have to ask the question, you know, what's different? What have organizations like that not done or done differently? And we're looking at that within Johnson & Johnson as well. We have a proud record of operational excellence, but we recognize that we can't sit still. We have to kind of look forward and get ahead of the curve because the global environment that we're operating in now is completely different. It's evolving at a rapid rate. And I suppose one way of defining what's the left of this tipping point, we refer to as the old world, to the right is the new world. For many organizations today, we're now moving more over to the right of this model, operating in the new world. So to very quickly, just to run down through them, the main differences that we're seeing is that we've moved from an era of mass production to now an era of mass innovation. The acceleration of new products hitting the marketplace today is phenomenal. New technologies, you know, it's very hard to keep up with that pace. We can't sit still. You know, we need to continue building on best practices and adopting best practices, as has been shared this morning. But we also need to look at how we can be differentiating ourselves from the competition, because if we keep just adopting best practices, we're just kind of keeping up with what's going on. You know, in this global environment, we have to look at things differently. You know, a lot of process improvements going on as well, but we have to recognize that there comes a point in time where the gains that you get from improving a process are going to be compounded by obstacles further downstream in your supply chain or in your system. So we need to kind of look more in terms of systems optimization. As many of the speakers have already said today as well, we need to move from management to more leadership, moving from that command and control environment to really, I suppose, the true essence of leadership for me is really helping people and supporting people do the best job as they possibly can, and also getting them to realize their true potential in terms of development. Brand loyalty. Again, many of the multi-internationals in this room would know that brand loyalty is something that we've built our business on over the years. But today, many of the decisions in relation to buying our products are taken out of our hands. Customers have more choice, and that presents a lot of, challenges for our businesses. The other thing about choice as well, I'll just mention, is that, as the old adage goes, if a customer had a bad experience several years ago, they told maybe 20 others. My tongue is drying up. But today, with the emergence of social media, if a customer has a bad experience, they can tell the world immediately. So quality has to be paramount to everything that we do. Like Dave was saying, we can't compromise quality in any decisions that we make. Core markets, we're seeing what's happening in the US. They're not, the recession has hit them. We're seeing the emergence of new markets with new needs. So we're having to adopt strategies for those new markets, which gives us the whole new term today of localization. And finally, I think this is a big one for me as well, is that our supply chains have been very product-centric. And one of the big trends that we're looking at right now in J&J is to move beyond just being product-centric, to be more customer-centric. How can we excite our customers? Thinking just beyond the products that we actually provide, to looking at the unmet medical needs, unmet customer experiences that we have a part and a role to play in. So this is another conceptual model, but it kind of builds on what Joe was saying earlier as well about change management. I believe that too often when we look at improving our systems, we look at where we are at this point in time, which is the present. And then we look forward into the future to see where we need to get to. We develop our strategies, our plans, etc. And then we go forward. There's a surprising fact, and it's well known, that 70% of improvement efforts or change efforts actually fail. And recent research through McKinsey's and PricewaterhouseCoopers suggests that actually that 70% is getting worse. And the question needs to be asked, why? And classic problem solving will tell you that before you actually move to a solution, you need to understand the root cause. But typically, when we look at the big picture, we forget to maybe take a step back and look at the past. And you'll find that, as Einstein always said, you can't solve the same problems with the same level of thinking that created them. So as leaders, we have to recognize what are the behaviors that we've actually demonstrated in the past. What's the decisions that we've made based on our thinking that has got us to where we are? And recognize first and foremost that we have to change certain things. There are certain behaviors that we have to stop doing, certain behaviors that we have to maintain, and obviously then certain behaviors that we have to embrace and start adopting. And that's a hard thing for leaders to do. It's probably one of the most hardest things for any organization to do. Because asking someone to change on a personal level after they've spent years of their life doing it and getting rewarded for it, it's an easier thing said than done. Okay, so that's one of the areas that we're tending to focus a lot on now across J&J, is really looking at leadership, recognizing that we have a massive role to play in differentiating our business. But the starting point for all of us is to look within ourselves, to become much more self-aware of what we're exhibiting in terms of our behaviors, and realize what are the new behaviors we have to adopt going forward. The other thing that we're trying to, exploit is we have to look at the bigger picture. And this is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the model that I'm showing here. It comes directly out of the TRIZ playbook, is that if you look at improving a system, you can't just look at 2 dimensions of time. You have to look at all 3 dimensions, past, present, and future. But also you have to look at your system in the context of a wider system. There are many subcomponents to our system which we have to look at improving. And up until now, we've been actually creating islands of excellence, local optimization, but recognizing that we need to now begin integrating our systems and getting the system optimized as a whole. So that's at the bottom layer. At the middle layer, recognizing that as we move more and more into the world of centralization and decentralization, we have to recognize as well that, especially for large multinationals, we do a lot of promotion around standardization, but we recognize we also need to be flexible and adaptive to local needs. So when we're looking at our strategies, there are certain things we need to standardize and leverage across a global scale, but other things that we need to adapt for local market needs. And finally, at the higher level, and this is where I said we need to move from product-centric to customer excitement, is that, if you look at Ireland as it is today, we have a healthcare system that's under severe pressure. I put some facts up here as well because it gives more substance. It makes people believe that I know what I'm talking about. But there's a 20% increase in the population of people aged 80 and over in the last 20 years. and there's a 60% rise in chronic related diseases in the same time frame. And that in itself is putting enormous pressure on our health service. We've seen as well over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been no addition of hospital beds. So when you look at unmet medical needs, it's no longer good enough to be just looking at the products that we provide to solve a given situation. We have to look at the wider picture. And how can we differentiate ourselves as manufacturers? What value proposition can we bring to the table? How can we lead the way, not just in terms of product excellence and operational excellence, but actually the whole picture, the service piece? Can we create models of excellence here in Ireland that we can actually adopt and apply to the rest of the world? Right now we have J&J companies in the US working with practitioners and government bodies, to solve problems in the health service. We can do the same here. And actually, sorry, one other piece as well over on the far right, the whole emergence of mobile health. Recognizing that physicians today, 62% on average are use their smartphones or tablets as part of their day-to-day work. It's the second most used device after the stethoscope. And there's a big opportunity as well for manufacturers to play in terms of leveraging that opportunity, leveraging that technology to provide solutions regarding mobile health, mobile monitoring, mobile diagnostics, so that we can actually move people quicker through our hospitals, free up more beds and focus on what matters most. So finally, recognizing that I'm down to maybe the last 3 or 4 minutes, is where must we exceed as leaders? Recognizing that none of this is possible unless we do something different. Leaders are the catalysts for all change. And for me, I'm just going to start off with a little quotation from this guy in the bottom right-hand corner. Robert Wood Johnson, he was the chairman of Johnson & Johnson back in the 1940s. He developed our world-renowned credo. He was a guy that was definitely ahead of his time, but he had a nice little quote that I use a lot, which is management is cause and everything else is effect. And if we want anything to change, it starts with ourselves first of all. The only thing I'd change with that statement is leadership is cause, everything else is effect. 4 areas that I've pointed out here in terms of where leaders must succeed. One is collaboration. Going back again to the example that I used at the beginning. Even though it's a very simple example using the bottle, look at what could be achieved in the space of a short frame of time in terms of the rich vein of ideas that could come forward by collaborating with other folks. We have to recognize we're all uniquely different and we can all bring something to the table. So there's both internal collaboration and external collaboration, because there's a whole host of problems yet to be solved. Development. As leaders, we have to look at developing ourselves and developing our teams to keep ahead of the curve, always recognizing what are the capabilities and talents that we need to keep investing into the organization. Innovation, that has been paramount to all discussions here today as well, recognizing that we have to be innovative with our approaches going forward to keep ahead of this curve. And finally, living healthy as well. It's often overlooked, but I'll just steal a quote from John F. Kennedy when he said that physical activity is one of the keys to a healthy body, but it's actually the basis for all dynamic and creative intellectual activity. And that's paramount for leaders as well. So for me and for J&J right now, these are what we consider from all the studies and research we've conducted over the last 2 years, the core areas that we have to focus on going forward. Okay? So with that, thank you very much, and I can end time.